Thank you so much. I will be talking about German philosophy and literature today around 1800 with a focus on German Romanticism. And it's not going to be so much an issue of whether the Romantics actually believed in an underworld, but rather what was the function of the underworld? What symbolic function did it have? What philosophical, literary, or aesthetic function did it have? German Romanticism, and this is around 1800, loved mines, caves, forms of descent, going down. Many of its writers were obsessed with geology, and one of its most important writers, who I'll be talking about today, Friedrich von Hardenberg, named Novalis, studied at a prestigious mining academy in Freiberg, and then became circuit director of the salt mines in Thuringia. And if German Romantics loved the ground, they loved the ground above all when the solid ground would give way beneath our feet, when it quakes. In short, when the very thing that lends our lives stability and a sense of place makes us feel uprooted and unstable and exposed to danger. Going into the ground, you feel a kind of ungrounding. And Friedrich Hölderlin, who is another poet I'll be talking about briefly, writes, "Where danger lies, there lies the saving power as well." And the ground embodies this tension and this paradox at this time, that you go to ground, and in German, zugrunde gehen means to go to the ground, but also to die, in a sense. You go to ground in order to be reborn, in a certain sense. German literature and philosophy around this time tries to make sense of this primal encounter with the earth as a site of danger, but also as a site of cultural possibility. So as a first example, let's take the philosopher Friedrich Schelling, who's one of the most important Romantic philosophers. He writes, "What Dante has written at the gate of the Inferno can also in a different sense be written above the entrance to philosophy. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Whoever truly wishes to philosophize must be free of all hope, all desire, all longing. They must will nothing, know nothing, feel entirely bare and poor, give everything away in order to gain everything. Philosophy is a descent, a catabasis. Catabasis. He's drawing, of course, on Christian mystical tropes of self-emptying in order to receive divine grace. But here, to descend into the underworld is something like an attempt to de-ideologize, to purge the self of the structure of its desires, the structure of its hopes, in order to reconstitute it anew. So if you strip yourself of your hopes and desires, then you can open yourself to new architectures, new organization of affects and ideas, and in a certain sense, all the other Romantic thinkers will draw this consequence, more transgressive and even perverse forms of desiring. Let's take a key example. E.T.A. Hoffmann, who's a famous Romantic author, wrote a short story, The Mines of Falun. Did I say that correctly? In 1819, a couple of years before Schelling's Erlangen lectures, which is where this quote is to be found. This story tells the story of a young man who's adrift in the world. He's lost his bearings. He's at sea. He's in a spiritual crisis. He's lost his mother. His mother is dead, and he has a chance encounter with a mysterious man, who says, "Go to Falun and you will find your destiny and your fortune." He does. He goes to the mines of Falun and finds everything that he seems to want: a welcoming family, a tight community, the promise of a stable life, a job, marriage to a beautiful young girl. Everything seems going well, except the mine itself. When the young man sees the mine the first time, his name is Elis Fröbom, he says, "One should think that Dante had descended here and beheld the Inferno with its desolate torment, with all its horror." He describes the mine as an encounter with horror, and the German word is entsetzen, which is an important word. To experience horror is to be entsetzt, that is to say unsettled or dislodged. And the encounter with the mine will, as it turns out, shake his entire worldview to its foundations. When he descends into the mine the first time, he sees an amazing landscape of, eventually when he descends into the mine, he comes to discover at the end of the story a landscape of metal trees, veins of ore, and then there's this mysterious earth queen who he desires, who pulls him deeper into the earth. And eventually what happens at the end of the story, there's a plot detail that I can't get into, but he has to choose between marrying his beautiful fiancée or going to the mine and uniting with this mysterious earth queen. Since we're in the German Romantic world, of course, I'll tell you what happens in a second, but he feels as if he were split into two halves, and it seemed like his better self, his true self, were descending into the center of the earth. So we see the two worlds. Eventually, the day of his marriage arrives. He has this beautiful fiancée. He's on the threshold of success and integration into his community, but he chooses the underworld, or rather, the underworld chooses him. At the day of his marriage, he leaves his beloved at the altar, runs away into the mine, and is united, in a sense, with his fantasy, the fantasy of the earth. And he's never seen from again. And then the poor fiancée who's left at the altar, she then doesn't remarry. So her life is equally, in a sense, destroyed. Everything goes on for a while until 50 years later, he's never seen from again. 50 years later, they go into the mine and they unearth his corpse, which is now turned to stone in a state of perfect preservation. They discover that he's been petrified, and she is still alive as an old woman, comes along, recognizes him, and they have this sort of Liebestod, where she dies as an old woman in an embrace with this petrified corpse, and then he crumbles into dust. And so we have an example of not so much a necrophilia, but also a petrophilia, a desire for the stone, but that's also a desire, in a sense, for the inorganic, a sort of death drive that manifests itself. And he does mention that he recodes this inferno as a paradise. And I would like to take that seriously. What the story is meant to do is denormalize our everyday bourgeois desires, and to actually consider, rather than seeing this as a sad end or something like this, in a sense, one asks the question whether or not the bourgeois world, the banal world of community, is not actually the true hell, and it has, in a sense, become recoded as hell, inasmuch as the underworld has been recoded as a paradise. And that's one way in which there can be an overturning of our everyday conventions, in a way, in the encounter with the underworld. I've already mentioned Novalis, Friedrich von Hardenberg, and he too was a lover of stones. He saw the earth and stones and minerals and crystal formations as archives of form-generating and form-dissolving processes. And some of his most radical experiments are in his works of art are experiments with the underworld. They also happen to be socio-political experiments. One of his fragments, when he's discussing the mineralogical theory of his instructor at this famous mining academy, Abraham Gottlob Werner, we read the following thought by Novalis. He says, "A stone can be treated in relation to the conditions with other natural bodies or its political nature, formerly, now, in the future." Every time you read something by Novalis, you sort of ask, what does it mean? What does it mean, the political nature of stones? Let's think about this together. We recall that Novalis' instructor, the Werner at the mining academy, had developed a theory of geological formation that was called Neptunism, and that was made largely as an alternative theory to the theory of volcanism. These two theories of geological emergence were then linked to a kind of symbolic and cultural formation. Namely, volcanism has this revolutionary, explosive, convulsive theory of how change occurs, where Neptunism is a more gradualist, the sedimentation emerges from the water, from the ocean. And this was linked to different political theories. Specifically, after the French Revolution, volcanism came to be coded as revolutionary, convulsive, violent, where Neptunism was gradual and slow change. And in one of his notes, Novalis, this is the second quote, writes, this is a note to one of his other works, the geognostic dispute between the volcanists and the Neptunists is essentially the dispute. And if we look at geological change, we can think of the politics of stones as, do we see a predominance of destabilizing revolutionary violence in the stone scaled up to human society, or a more gradualist conception of order? In one of his most complicated works, which is a fairy tale in his novel Heinrich von Ofterdingen, this fairy tale is called Klingsor's Fairy Tale, and it has been the subject of scholarly reflections since forever. Basically, it's an extraordinarily difficult text. But here, there is a play, and we saw this in one of the other talks, between the astral world, the world of human beings, and the underworld. And there's a crisis in all three of these worlds. And eventually in this fairy tale, what happens is there's a revolutionary energy where one character in the human world allies itself with these anarchic, chaotic forces of the fates in the underworld. And the underworld becomes this site of subaltern, revolutionary violence, really. And it eventually consumes itself. And this crisis is resolved at the end of the fairy tale when this first of all, when there's a kind of erotic reconciliation, but above all, the anarchic, chaotic forces of the underworld have to be recoded in some way. You have to give an account of them and stabilize them, to contain them, to archive them, to organize this anarchic energy, not to ignore it or eliminate it, but to make it present in some kind of a cultural form. And this is what he does at the end. I'll give you one example. He recodes the chaotic forces surging up from the underworld in the white and black grid of a chessboard. And there's a dialogue. There's a hero he's speaking here, speaking with a female muse, Sophie. And the enemies are the revolutionary agents, the kind of sans-culottes. This is definitely, I think, the lower classes. And he said, here, the hero said, are the remains of your enemies. A stone slab with black and white squares lay there, and beside it a number of figures made of alabaster and black marble. It is a chessboard, said Sophie. All war is bound to this board and into these pieces. It is a monument to the old, somber time. So now, like a geological formation, it captures the revolutionary energy and gives it a kind of a form or an archive. There's a double binary system, a white and black figures on a white and black ground, structures and repurposes these violent energies of geological volcanism in the form of a strategic game. So chess then functions as a symbolic medium that can channel the forces of revolt which rise from the depths, into forms that become commensurate with social and political order. And so the idea is we also have a theory of art and of play, of games, that somehow we have to take these chaotic forces and allow them a mode of expression sublimated in the form of games or an aesthetic form. It's also a theater is another example that is found. I won't go into that here. But that's another model of how to deal with these anarchic, chaotic forces from the depths. The final one, do I have time? 1 more minute? Is Friedrich Hölderlin, who is the poet I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. And I will just mention that he was very concerned to place us, also concerned to give us some sort of contact with the ground. And for him, the question of the revolution, the anarchic forces in the ground was suffused with ambiguity and uncertainty. Unlike Novalis, who was pretty sure he could recode these forces and stabilize them, Hölderlin saw these forces in the ground of revolution and placed us all at a sort of moment of potentiality where we could either dissolve as a society Or this might be the convulsive forms that might give birth to something new. And he expresses this at the end of a poem which he celebrates this peace treaty of Lunéville, where everything seems to have stabilized in some kind of a celebration of peace, but at the very end of the poem, we feel the prescient thought of an underworld as an unfinished project, a warning, a hope, a fear, and something whose ultimate outcome we cannot predict when we unleash the radical revolutionary desires of the oppressed classes. For it, and this is the quote, "For it gladly rests insensate until it is ripe, that which is anxiously active below." Thank you.
A very brief question. In Hoffmann, he's sinking to his true self. Here, we're negotiating turbulent forces.
That's right.
Is there a connection between this journey to the true self and this control of the turbulent world?
There are quite different models, in my view. One is more of a cultural critique of bourgeois morality. The other one is really asking us to occupy a situation of uncertainty where the world is changing around us. It seems to be disintegrating and falling apart. We don't know how to govern these forces, and we're at this precipice where we don't see if this entire social order is going to implode and fall apart, or maybe we can hang on by the skin of our teeth and something new will come out of it. Sounds resonant. So.
Thank you.